Hi friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Priscilla and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about how we incorporate literature into our homeschool in order to reinforce and teach a second language. So I speak to my children in Portuguese and I have been doing that since birth. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2.5-year-old. And I try my best to speak to them in Portuguese. As a homeschooling family, I oftentimes have to speak to them in English in order for us to get through our lessons. However, because we follow the Charlotte Mason method, for the most part, we have been able to incorporate Portuguese into our homeschool by fulfilling our literature requirement in Portuguese. So, for the most part, the poems that we read, the fairy tales that we read, as well as the fables and the texts that we read for term novels, I try my best to do those in Portuguese. And I just want to share with you today some of the books that I have used these last couple of years that have helped me to do that. So, one of the books that I have used is a collection. It's the William Bennett's Book of Virtues. And so in Brazil, they have an edition that is 2 volumes. So I will go ahead and show those to you in a little bit and actually have you look at the inside of the book. But anyway, the main reason why I wanted to take advantage of homeschooling in order to teach my children Portuguese was that because we live in America and we go to an American church, a lot of the things that my children watch on television are oftentimes in English. I do find that their exposure to English is very, very significant. And when it comes to Portuguese, my conversations with them at home on a day-to-day basis is primarily the way that they get exposed to Portuguese. And as you can imagine, the kind of vocabulary that we need in order to just get by day to day is not very sophisticated. And so, books and story literature provides a way for my children's vocabulary in Portuguese to become richer, right? And then we can discuss those ideas in Portuguese as well. Now, in the Charlotte Mason method, narration is a big part of each lesson. And so when we read a story, my child then narrates or tells back what he has heard. And he does that in Portuguese. I read to him in Portuguese and he narrates in Portuguese as well. And so it has been a wonderful way to expose my children to richer vocabulary than they normally would just from having conversations with me at home. And it also gives me a chance to have more topics of conversations with them as well, based on those stories that we read and the ideas presented in the stories. And so we have read many of the classical fairy tales. We've read those in Portuguese. Aesop fables, we've read those in Portuguese. And they do get exposed to those in English as well, just through, especially my older son, just reading independently. We have those books in English, and so he does enjoy to read. He does enjoy reading them in English as well. But when we are doing literature in homeschool, we do those lessons in Portuguese. So I will go ahead and show you the actual books that we have used in our homeschool. So the first book, or I should say books, that I wanted to share with you are these 2 volumes by William Bennett. And I believe you can find them in Spanish. I'm not sure about other languages, but this is the collection that I was able to find in Portuguese. And so both of these books make up a collection that includes fairy tales, it includes poems, as well as fables. And so this collection obviously is in Portuguese. And what has been most helpful about it is that these are they're all classical stories, and these particular volumes include works by Brazilian authors as well. So they include the original stories found in William Bennett's Book of Virtues, as well as additional stories by Brazilian authors. And so I really appreciated that. And like I said, these are all classical stories that that cover a wide range of topics. The idea being that whether it's a fairy tale or a poem or fables, the text is really helping children develop different virtues, as the name suggests, right? As the Book of Virtues. So discipline, compassion, responsibility, friendship, work, courage, perseverance, honesty, faithfulness, as well, or loyalty, I would say, as well as faith. These are the broad categories that the stories cover. And so it has a table of contents, and then also in the back you can find the index that actually includes the various, the title as well as the author or the adaptation of that particular story. And so we've used these a lot over the past couple of years since we started formal lessons, just because, again, these are classical stories that really build also a great vocabulary for kids, because they're written in very rich language. And honestly, I had to oftentimes use a dictionary to look up some words myself, because they are not there have been words that I'm not familiar with. Most of them I can just understand based on context, but there have been words that I had to look up. And I'm very honest with my kids when we either, because I didn't read the story ahead of time, because I didn't have a chance to, or it's a story that we were not originally planning to read, and I'm reading it for the first time. I'm very honest with them when I come across a word that I do not understand, because I want them to see how language acquisition is not a how do you say it? When it comes to language acquisition, like, you're always learning, right? You're always developing a richer vocabulary as you are reading and coming across different ideas and different terms in the language that you're studying. And so the Children's Book of Virtues, I was able to find them in Portuguese. And again, it was so helpful because there are just many, many stories and many poems and fables here as well. So then another book that we have used in our homeschool, also a collection by William Bennett, was the Book of Heroes, the Children's Book of Heroes. Again, this is a translation from the original work in English, and I loved that my kids could be exposed to these stories in Portuguese. And again, the language is rich, and David and Goliath, and you can find the illustrations are great. A lot of classical texts and some more modern stories as well, such as Helen Keller's teacher, I should say. Yeah, so that's another one that we have used. I also picked up a book in Portuguese of Aesop's Fables. Again, you can find Aesop's Fables in Portuguese and in pretty much any language at various levels in terms of the richness of the language and the complexity of the vocabulary. I tend to go for the richer versions of fables and fairy tales, again, just because if I'm going to be reading to my child, I want them to get the very best possible, and I want to set the bar high. And if they have questions, we review vocabulary before we read when necessary. And if they have questions, obviously when we discuss, they can ask questions as well. But at the end of the day, I really try to expose them to rich vocabulary so that yeah, so that as they become more and more fluent, their vocabulary is not basic, right? This is part of their education. So I want to make sure that, again, the bar is high. So this is a collection of fables with great illustrations as well. I also picked up a book of poems by Vinicius de Moraes. So he is a Brazilian composer, and he's also written some poetry. And so this is like a kid's poetry book. The language is more accessible, it's modern, and the topics vary, but they're everyday topics. You know, this poem is about the clock, door, house, about the air, a lion, an elephant, a duck, because this particular collection is called Arca de Noé, so Noah's Ark. And so it's a collection of poems by Vinicius de Moraes in Portuguese. And the way we have used these poems is both just to read and enjoy, and as well as for recitation, for memorizing. And so the tabs are some of the poems that we've had a chance to memorize as part of our homeschool. Each term we have a term novel, and that's a story that more of like a chapter book that I read aloud just as part of our homeschool program. And so one of our terms we did the Chronicles of Narnia, and so we did the Chronicles of Narnia in Portuguese, and it was so wonderful to be able to do that. We've also read the Hobbit in Portuguese, again, pretty advanced as a second language, but I want my children to enjoy the language and enjoy the stories, and so I don't want to dumb it down for them too much. I do believe that they can get quite a lot from the stories, and we do discuss when there are specific questions related to vocabulary. And so this is a Brazilian version, a Portuguese version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Now, my 7-year-old, he is reading at a 3rd grade reading level at this point. And so because his reading in English is going very well, I decided to introduce reading lessons in Portuguese as well. It's not very formal. What that has looked like for us is picking up a book like this. So this is a children's story, like Bible stories, a book of Bible stories. And they're very short, and someone actually gave this to us. They're very short. They're like 1, sometimes 2 pages long. And I have him just read to me, and you know, he'll sound out the words. A lot of words he already knows and he's able to read comfortably. Others he tries to sound out and he needs support to figure out. At this point, I'm not really teaching him the grammar and all that. I'm more focusing on him learning organically, just using the skills that he has developed in learning English, how to read in English, and applying that to Portuguese, because in some ways it is easier to read in Portuguese. And so he's been doing really well. And so we'll read a page. Sometimes, depending on how it's going, we might read, if it's a 2-pager, like we might read 2 pages. But as you can see, for the things that he is reading himself, the text is very simple, or a lot more simple than the things that I'm reading out loud to him. So this is the story of Ruth and Naomi. So that's what we've been doing for his Portuguese reading lesson. And another way that we have incorporated Portuguese into our homeschool is by working with a Brazilian math program. So this is something that I purchased online. It's a digital file that I then have printed. So this is actually my preschooler's math book. And I love it. One, because I can support a Brazilian business, even though I live in the United States. Another reason why I love it is because the professor who develops this material he's brilliant. And his wife is actually the illustrator. So she's an artist and she is the illustrator. And I absolutely love it because it gives us an opportunity to incorporate Portuguese into our homeschool in a rich way. It also includes, through the illustrations and through some of the word problems, just opportunities for them to be exposed to things that are very Brazilian, whether it's like different types of fruits and different animals that come up. But again, it's been wonderful to do that. So this is an animal that is native to Brazil, and it's a very fun book. Again, different birds that are native to Brazil. And when we sit down to do math, everything is done in Portuguese. And so they are comfortable with that. What I have found I've had to do with my 7-year-old is that at this point they introduce calendar, they introduce time, as well as currency or money. And so I have, in addition to doing the material in a Brazilian, in the Brazilian math book for his grade, we additionally you use rod and staff text as well, or workbook as well, so that he is getting the lessons on those specific topics as well in English, so that he's learning, how, like, whether it's calendar or time or currency, so that he's getting exposed to these things in English as well. So as you can see, there's a lot that I can read, that I have to read and give directions, and it's all in Portuguese, and I absolutely love that. All right, so I hope it was helpful for you to have a sense of what it is that we have been using. As I mentioned, sometimes depending on your target language, it might be very hard to come across books in the language. And so it's very helpful when you're able to find collections. That way you have many stories and many texts to work with in those volumes. And so getting collections have definitely been a huge help for our family, specifically the William Bennett collection. So yeah, again, I hope that this video was helpful. And if you liked what I shared, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.